Hello and welcome back to another video. My name is CJ the Populist New Yorker, and today we're going to be taking a look at a hypothetical scenario, and that is if the 2024 election were to be held today, what would the results of such a scenario look like? So currently I've decided to put the matchup between former President Donald Trump and current President Joe Biden, since there is a lot of news circulating that Trump apparently wants to run in 2024. But just a hypothetical rematch scenario, really. I won't get into all of that too much in this video. More so how Biden would hold up in a rematch against Trump if the election were held today. Now, a lot of things have changed since November in the country, particularly the country's view of Joe Biden as a starter. We can look at Joe Biden's popularity. And this is whether you approve or disapprove of Joe Biden. These polls began in January of 2021. We're going to use FiveThirtyEight's numbers. We're also going to look at some civics numbers as well. So we started off in January with Joe Biden at a 53% approval to a 36% disapproval. FiveThirtyEight tends to skew somewhat left as well in polling. So I imagine disapproval could have been around 40 or so percent, but Joe Biden was significantly more popular at the beginning of his term than he is today. Fast forward to today, Joe Biden is at a 45 or 46% approval rating to a 48% disapproval rating, nearly a 2.5% plus for the disapproval or a minus 2.5 in the negative. Now, this, of course, is the aggregate of all the polls that they've conducted of likely voted, registered voters, and all adults. Of course, if you change the polls to registered voters, the number changes a little bit in Biden's favor, and if you do poll all adults, the number is about the same as it is with all polls. So it doesn't really make a difference which one you look at. Biden is in the negative. He had stayed in the positive for a while, even during all the Afghanistan stuff, but the situation really started to crumble before him. We can take a look at civics. Now, civics actually, I would say, tends to skew a bit toward the right. Also, keep in mind that approval and favorability are two separate things. Joe Biden's unfavorable is higher than his disapproval. And his unfavorability ratings were actually higher before the election. Then they kind of cooled off. Now they're kind of going back up again. This was because before the election, you had people on the left and the right who were not really satisfied with Joe Biden. Of course, basically all of the right wing in the country and a sizable plurality of the left wing during the Democratic primaries and all that. And as it was clear that Joe Biden was becoming the nominee, the unfavorables shrunk to almost tied. And then now they're going back up again due to all the Afghanistan. The situation there is probably one of the main reasons. Also, the fact that coronavirus is coming back again and surging once again. Doesn't matter whose fault that is. Usually the blame lays on the person in the White House, and that person is Joe Biden at the moment. So we're going to take a look at the following states going west to east. We're going to start off with the state of Nevada. Of course, back in November, Nevada went to Joe Biden by 2.4%. It was slightly redder than it was in 2016. And the areas where the trend was most apparent was not these rural counties where you had larger shifts, but it was actually Clark County, which is the most populous county in the state of Nevada, where Donald Trump only lost the county by 9 points. If we take a look at civics, though, the favorability rating of Joe Biden in the state of Nevada is not as low as you'd expect. In fact, it's only 1 point in the negative. Now, I wish we had a graph that had a history. Maybe it does. Well, this is just the state of... Is this just the state of Nevada? It is. So Joe Biden was in the favorable for a while, but on election day, Joe Biden was about where he is today. In fact, he's slightly more favorable than he was on election day. So if we're going to take favorability into account, we're going to take possibly a more energized Trump base. I still think you'd see a state of Nevada that would go to Joe Biden, but possibly by a slimmer margin, although it would probably still stay in his category. Again, Joe Biden is actually viewed more favorably in Nevada than he was on election day. So that definitely counts for something, although there is a margin of error. But I still think Nevada would probably go Democratic if the election were held today. The state of Arizona. If we take a look at Arizona in the 2020 election, the state had gone 0.3% in favor of Joe Biden. It was one of the closest states in the country, along with the state of Georgia. I think these were the two closest states by margin. Georgia was the closest, followed by Arizona. Once again, we'll look at civics, and we'll take a look at Biden's favorability in Arizona, and it is underwater by 11 points. And we can take a look at where Joe Biden was on election day. He was underwater by, 7 points. Now he's underwater by 11. So Arizona is not a state that was particularly lopsided this election. It was a very close state. And this was a state that the polls had Joe Biden up by 4% going into election day, and then they kind of narrowed to around 2. But even if Arizona is one of these more establishment states, there's probably a decent enough chunk of the electorate that would be disappointed with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, but more specifically how it was handled, not the withdrawal itself, which was actually very popular, and that's one of the biggest issues today. I would say, probably Donald Trump would win the state of Arizona very narrowly in this situation. Joe Biden is much more unfavorable now than he was in 2020, in November, in the state of Arizona. And that doesn't mean all of these people would vote for Trump, but just a general voter apathy would probably be enough to flip the state, because the state was a lot closer than people thought. Some people thought it was going to go to Biden by 4% or 2%. It only went by 0.3, so it was a lot closer than we'd expected. Moving on to the state of Colorado, we're not going to talk too much about Colorado because it's not really that much in contention, but I do want to take a look at where Joe Biden stands in Colorado. Joe Biden is above water in Colorado. We could take a look at where he was on election day and kind of compare it to see roughly which way the margin would go. And we can see on election day, Joe Biden was actually more unfavorable than he is today. So I don't really think the margin in Colorado would change all that much, probably around 12 points, maybe a bit more in the red, but I would say for right now, Colorado would still remain safe for Joe Biden. New Mexico, we'll take a look at New Mexico as well. Again, this isn't a state that's going to go red or anything like that, but I do want to look at possibly where the margin might be. Now, currently, Joe Biden's doing very bad in the state of New Mexico, but he's not doing too much worse than he was going into this. He's 10 points underwater now, and on election day, he was roughly 6. So the margin we saw in New Mexico was an 11-point margin for Joe Biden. I think maybe if it was held today, we would see a 10 or a 9 point. So I think New Mexico, by my estimation, would be a likely state, which would be anywhere from 5 to 11 points. Moving on to the state of Texas, Joe Biden is not popular in the state of Texas as of right now. Again, we're doing this not in 2024, but if the election were held right now, this could be Joe Biden's low point in his presidency. This might be his average. We don't really know what the future has in store. But Joe Biden is currently 22 points underwater in favorability in Texas. And on election day, he was roughly 20 so points, 17 points underwater. Now we're looking at a slightly wider margin. So I think, again, we're looking at a state where Joe Biden lost by 5 point, I think it was 5.5%, 5 point something percent. I don't know how accurate, if these are the final numbers or not. I think we would still see a likely Texas, maybe 6 points or so, maybe 7 points. But I don't think you'd see a giant fluctuation because only a few months have passed. But you will find people that maybe regretted their vote for Joe Biden or maybe regretted voting for Trump, like what Joe Biden's doing. But I think it's more so in the other category. Nebraska's second. I don't think we have a whole lot of polling on that. Nebraska's second does strike me as a more neoconservative district. We're on the wrong thing. It strikes me as a more, Bushite conservative district. I don't think we have any actual polling on Nebraska's second. We have Nebraska at large. If I had to guess, I'd say today, Nebraska's second probably still goes blue by a much smaller margin. It went to Biden by around 7. I'd say maybe around 2 points if the election were held now, because I certainly think some of the neoconservatives who supported Biden in November would probably not vote for him another time around. Minnesota is one of those states where Joe Biden is in the negative, but he's only in the negative by 2 points. We could take a look at how his favorability has fared over time in the state of Minnesota. So on election day, he was unfavorable by 1, unfavorable by 2. That's negligible. I think we'd probably see a very similar margin of around 7 points in favor of Joe Biden in Minnesota. Again, it's really not a whole lot of a difference going into this. Next, we're going to move down to the state of Iowa. If we look at Biden's rating on civics. Now, again, this is very poll-oriented, but it's really the only gauge we have at the moment to see where the country actually stands with the Biden presidency and how they view him. So, on election day, Biden was unfavorable by -15 in the state of Iowa. Again, not really much of a difference, -13. We'd probably see a very similar margin out of the state of Iowa. Nothing too dramatic coming out of the state of Iowa. But Arizona was one of those states where we saw a sizable shift in the negative, and I think that probably would have been enough to flip the state toward Republicans. Because again, Arizona is one of those states in the Sun Belt that has been trending Republican, but it's different than a state like Georgia because it has a much stronger Republican history, and you have a lot more split ticketers in a state like Arizona. If you look back at the 2018 election, there probably were like 100,000 or so voters who voted for Kyrsten Sinema and Doug Ducey on the same ballot. Probably more, actually. So this is a state that split tickets a lot more than a state like Georgia, from what I've noticed. So I certainly think it's possible for a shift like that to happen. Next, we're going to look at Wisconsin. Wisconsin was one of the closest states in 2016. It was the third closest state. Joe Biden won the state by 0.6%. This was a state that in 2016, Donald Trump won by 0.7. If we take a look at Biden's unfavorables in the state of Wisconsin, they're not terrible compared to these other states. He's down by -4, which is a lot better than some of the other swing states we've been looking at lately. If we compare it to Election Day, Biden is actually more favorable now, or viewed more favorably now, than he was in Election Day. So with that being said, again, based on the mood of the country, and again, it all comes down to turnout too, but I think Wisconsin probably narrowly would stay with Joe Biden, given that. And I know many people in the comments are going to disagree, but again, you have to look at this objectively and not through a party lens and what the data kind of shows with these races. If we take a look at the state of Michigan, Michigan, I believe Joe Biden is less popular than in Wisconsin, and I was right, 51-44 in the negative. And Michigan was a more partisan state than Wisconsin. Wisconsin was very close. Biden's unfavorabilities on Election Day was -4. Right now, it is -7. So I think public opinion going against Biden a bit more. Michigan would probably move into the tilt column, maybe 1.9% in favor of Joe Biden. But a rematch, especially this close, just again, hypothetical, if the election was held today, this is less than a year after the 2020 election. I don't think you're going to see a major shift really occurring. Again, we only saw one flip, which was the state of Arizona so far. Next, we're going to move on to the state of Ohio. Ohio, I don't think is going to change particularly much. I think that'll probably stay likely Trump, but we'll take a look at the polling out of Ohio anyway. And Ohio is coming in like a lot of the red states, a lot like Oklahoma and stuff, 57% unfavorable, 38% favorable. And if we look at on Election Day, Joe Biden was underwater by 13 points, 14 points rather. Today he's underwater by, almost 20. So I think we'd probably see maybe more like a 10-point margin of victory for Trump, but Ohio would still definitely stay Republican. We're going to move on to the state of Maine. We only have polls on Maine at large. They don't really poll congressional districts from what I know. And by the way, I'll have the links to both the civics poll and the 538 polls in the description if you want to look at them. Of course, depending on when you look at them, these polls could be slightly different because these polls are as of Monday, September 6th. They could be different once you actually see them. But these are what they look like as of right now. But I'll leave the link down below anyway so you can take a look. Maine, Biden is underwater by 6 points. If we go back to Election Day, Biden was underwater by around 4. 6 isn't really a tremendous difference, although definitely probably would do slightly worse in the state. Maine second would probably still stay with Trump as it did in this cycle. And the state of Maine at large would probably go to Joe Biden by around 8 or 9 points, like we saw back in November. Next, we're going to take a look at the Keystone State. If we take a look, and again, this is the state that could... Oh, wait, we skipped over New Hampshire. We'll take a look at New Hampshire now before skipping it, which would be very unfortunate. Currently in the state of New Hampshire, Biden is above water by plus 2%. We can relate that to how he was on Election Day. On Election Day, Joe Biden was favorable by 4 points. Now he's favorable by around 2. Not a huge difference. Biden would still win the state of New Hampshire probably by around 6 points, maybe a little bit less than he did back in the 2020 election. Because back in 2020, we saw Biden win the state by over 7 points. Maybe 6 points this time around, but I still think it would be a likely margin in New Hampshire. I wouldn't think there'd be a whole lot of movement away from Biden this soon. Now we'll move on to the Keystone State. If we take a look at Pennsylvania's numbers for Joe Biden, they are about similar to what we saw in Michigan, plus 7 against, or minus 7 for Joe Biden, should I say. On Election Day, we saw Biden's unfavorables at -1. He was -1 favorability. Now we're at -7. I think that's a fairly significant shift. Now, Pennsylvania is one of those states that was down to 1.2%. You know, turnout in the Northeast for Trump, turnout in the city really changed, made the difference. Places like Chester County, Montgomery County, Delaware County, these really populated areas in the Philadelphia collar area, these are the places that lost the state of Pennsylvania for Trump, won it for Biden. Would a 7-point shift in unfavorability be enough to swing the state? I'd say as of today, probably yes. I'd say barely. I'd say the state of Pennsylvania barely goes for Donald Trump. Now, again, this is loosely based, of course, on approval, but I take other things into consideration. Biden's approval was pretty poor in New Mexico, and is right now, but New Mexico is a very blue state, and it's a state that voted for Joe Biden by 11. But you're talking about similar numbers in New Mexico and Pennsylvania, but Pennsylvania is a state that was much closer. This was not a huge difference in votes. This was less than 100,000. That could be everything. This is a state of 12 million people. I think Trump would win the state of Pennsylvania in this situation. But this is going to be a nail-biter nonetheless. We're already at 244 to 219. Joe Biden obviously has a lead. He's very likely to win Virginia. We'll take a look at Virginia's numbers now, actually, because this might tie in a bit. This might tie into a future video we do on Virginia regarding the governor's race. And there'll probably be a few more of those, considering it's really the only big election going on today, in this year, rather. But on Election Day, Joe Biden was at... Election Day was the 4th. Basically the same. Was at -1 unfavorability. Today, he's at -3. His unfavorables have gone up. He was actually favorable for a bit, and now it's gone down again. I don't think that would have a big difference on how Virginia voted. I still think we'd see a 10 or 9 point margin. Again, this time we saw Joe Biden win the state of Virginia by 10.1%. Maybe you'd see it go down a point, half a point, whatever. It really wouldn't be a whole difference. You'd probably see a very similar result. Some of these counties that went blue for Joe Biden in 2020, Virginia Beach, Stafford, Chesapeake, Chesterfield, they probably would stay blue again. So we're going to keep Virginia in the likely category. North Carolina was a state that Donald Trump only won by 1.3%. This is a smaller margin than Mitt Romney, and of course his 2016 margin, which was around 3.6%. We take a look at civics, where North Carolina currently stands right now. We have a state that has the same unfavorabilities as the state of Pennsylvania. on election day, Joe Biden was underwater by about 8 points. If we look at today, Joe Biden has actually increased his favorability slightly, but he's still at around 7% unfavorable. A 2-point swing is kind of negligible, and that's how I've been going about all of these. Maybe Joe Biden would even do slightly better, but Donald Trump would still barely cling on to the state of North Carolina, I think, as well. Again, 2 points is within the margin of error, though, so it could go either way. Next, we're going to take a look at the state of Georgia. Now, Georgia has not been friendly to Republicans lately. In 2020, they elected Joe Biden for the first time, a Democrat for the first time since 1992. It only went to Joe Biden by 0.3%, but then again, just 2 months later in the January 2021 special elections, we saw Jon Ossoff win by 1.4% and Raphael Warnock by 2%, flipping the Senate in favor of the Democrats. If we look at Joe Biden's favorability in Georgia, it's pretty poor. He's at -13. That's worse than Pennsylvania, worse than New Mexico, and this was a state that voted for Joe Biden barely in the 2020 election. But on election day, his unfavorables were at -11, and he still won the state regardless. Today, they are -13. Now, this is a tough call. This is a tough call because a blue call would give the election narrowly to Joe Biden, and a call in the red would give the election to Donald Trump. Now, this is a very tough decision because, on the one hand, Georgia was very close in 2020 with better favorability ratings for the president, which was -13. Now we're at -15. Which is worse than a lot of other states, but Georgia seems to put favorability more aside than these other states, than states like Pennsylvania or New Mexico. It seems to have less of a bearing on how the voters actually vote. And I'm one of the people that thinks that Georgia is rapidly becoming out of reach for the Republicans. I think my gut feeling tells me that if the election were held today, I think, and a lot of people disagree, but I think the state of Georgia would narrowly hold on for Joe Biden. I think Donald Trump's unpopularity in the state, especially in the suburbs, and the trends in the suburbs are just too dramatic to overcome. Even if Joe Biden does lose some ground, Democrats have gained so much ground in just 2 months in the state. So I think the state would narrowly go to President Biden, which would actually keep him in office. Again, this is an impossible hypothetical. An election cannot be held today on the 6th of September in 2021. But I'm just saying if it was, these are the numbers we'd be looking at. But again, this is a nail biter either way. Unfavorables doesn't necessarily determine it, but it's a big gauge of how I determine it in this scenario because it's all we have to go off. We don't really have a whole lot of hypothetical polling that much. But, a state like Georgia, a state like Wisconsin could easily flip the other way. So it really all depends, and Biden might have a slight incumbency advantage as well, but this would be a really interesting election map to look at. Obviously, I didn't forget about the state of Florida. Florida, Joe Biden is actually more favorable than he is in Georgia, which is really interesting. He's underwater by 12 in Florida. If we look on election day, Joe Biden was only underwater by 7 points. Now we're up to 12. Definitely going to be probably around a 5-point victory maybe for Trump. Florida just seems to be one of those states that's getting redder and redder as time goes on, kind of like Ohio and Iowa, especially the northern migration of Republicans from the Northeast coming down to Florida due to COVID restrictions, political differences, house affordability, taxes. There's a whole host of issues as why people are leaving the Northeast, and perhaps maybe I'll make a video on that. But nonetheless, this was a very hard map to predict. There were a few states that I was hesitant to call one way or the other. But as of right now, Joe Biden would narrowly hang on in the Electoral College. Of course, the popular vote would be a very different story. Joe Biden would probably win the popular vote by 5 or 6 million votes. A little less than he did this time around in November. But we have a lot of states in the tilt category in on both sides. 46 electoral votes in the tilt Republican category. And we have 48 electoral votes in the tilt Democratic Party. These states could go either way. So it really is difficult to predict. But as of right now, I think Joe Biden would barely hold on to the presidency. And perhaps I'll do another hypothetical election like this in a few months. Whether his approval goes up or down, I probably will make another one as in the lead up to 2024, because we very possibly could see a matchup between Donald Trump and Joe Biden again in 2024. So this is really the first rematch scenario I've done with the two candidates since the election. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Please leave a thumbs up if you did. Subscribe to the channel. Comment down below if you agree with me or if you disagree with me. As always, thank you all for watching again, and I hope to see you in the next video.